All right. Thank you all for joining us. This is Psychedelically Speaking, the University of Ottawa's speaker series on psychedelics and consciousness, hosted by Society for the Advancement of Psychonautic Studies. The third Tuesday of every month, we join to speak with experts in psychedelics and consciousness studies and people from psychedelic communities and organizations. And we also host a yearly conference on psychedelics and consciousness at the University of Ottawa. If you check out our YouTube channel, you'll find recordings of past talks, and we welcome you to reach out and engage with us if you would like to do so. So today we have Taylor Loyden and Connor Mize from the Church of Gaia. So I was just going to give some quick background and then give the floor to them. So from the Church Gaia, their statement of beliefs, I just wanted to quickly read. At the Church of Gaia, our faith is rooted in deep reverence for Mother Earth and the sacred plants she has gifted us. We recognize Gaia as a living, conscious being, and we honor all life upon her, humans, animals, birds, insects, plants, and all creatures alike, as sacred and interconnected. This indigenous wisdom forms the foundation of our spiritual path, guiding our rituals, traditions, and way of life. We believe through the sacrament of ayahuasca, we can transcend the physical world and enter into communion with the spirit of the earth, our creator, and the divine guides and ancestors who walk with us in the unseen realms. This sacred work offers profound healing, wisdom, and transformation, allowing us to restore harmony within ourselves and with the world around us. I'll also quickly introduce Taylor and Connor, and I should say that today we're kind of discussing the legal hurdles and navigating the sort of labyrinthine legal system of the U.S. in regards to the use of these plants and medicines in religious contexts. So for some background, Taylor is an attorney, strategist, and advocate who sees the law not just as a set of constraints, but as a tool for protection, alignment, and thoughtful innovation. As managing attorney of Terrapin Legal, she helps clients turn visionary ideas into legally sound, strategically grounded realities. Whether advising entrepreneurs, researchers, spiritual communities, clinics, or advocacy groups, Taylor works at the forefront of psychedelic law, offering clear, responsive guidance through a rapidly evolving legal landscape. Her approach is shaped by a multidisciplinary background and a career that extends well beyond traditional legal practice. Before becoming an attorney, Taylor spent over a decade as a backcountry guide, wilderness therapist, instructor, medic, and naturalist. That work taught her how to navigate uncertainty, care for others in complex environments, and build practical systems that prioritize safety and integrity, all of which continue to inform her legal practice today. Her experience in ethnobotany, mycology, and indigenous traditions offer further context for her work, supporting conversations that span science, culture, and policy. She brings a relational lens to legal strategy, bridging regulatory requirements with the deeper values and intentions behind the work her clients are doing. Connor Mize first came to ayahuasca as an atheist struggling with depression, only to discover a profound spiritual connection he hadn't realized was missing from his life. After several life-changing ceremonies, he felt called to deepen his understanding, leading him to the Amazonian jungles. There he immersed himself in traditional plant dietas, learning to brew ayahuasca, and studied both Spanish and the Shipibo language, along with Icaros, the sacred songs that guide ayahuasca ceremonies. His natural ability to memorize hundreds of songs as a teenager translated into a deep connection with language and the intricate melodies of Icaros. Connor credits Teddy Ramaya Rodriguez as a pivotal mentor in his healing journey. With wisdom and thought-provoking guidance, Teddy encourages deep reflection rather than offering direct answers. He challenges Connor to explore his understanding, often responding to revelations with a simple yet profound phrase. Así es como funciona. That's how it works. Through this mentorship, Connor's embraced the balance between guidance and self-discovery, shaping his approach to working with plants and reinforcing the belief that at times we are our own best teachers. Committed to lifelong learning, Connor returns to Peru each year further study and plant dietas. He shares a close brotherly bond with Teddy, speaking with him daily and cherishing the opportunity to work alongside his extended family, including Teddy's grandfather. And in 2024, during a ceremony together, Maestro Tito received a vision and message, after which he gifted Connor with a Shipibo name, Niwe Metsa, which means beautiful. All right, that's enough from me. I will give the floor over to you, Taylor and Connor, and thank you again for joining us. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the introduction.
Thank you.
So yeah, where to begin, right? It was about, what, Taylor? In total, 3.5 years of work.
Yeah, more on your end, I think.
And still at it, unfortunately.
It was about
Fortunately,
3
unfortunately.
years. 3 years tip to tail of DEA engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you think? Should we start off at a high level on like what this process is, kind of at a high level, and then talk about what going through it was like?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So high level for folk, the United States has a federal law called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And on its surface, it's simple. It requires that one has a sincere religious belief that is substantially burdened by the government. And when we think substantial burden, think government prohibition, seizures of packages, raids, things along those lines. And then once those two things are proven, the burden shifts to the government to prove that it has a compelling interest in restricting the use and that it does so in the least restrictive means necessary. And the two primary compelling interests that the government puts forth today are public health and safety. So think medical intake, psychological intake, emergency response planning, when we start getting into synthetic safe sourcing, things along those lines. And anti-diversion is the other one. So the DEA wants to maintain this closed loop system where they know everything from the origin to its final use. So making sure that the medicine isn't escaping the container. And the DEA, prior to, I believe it was 2009, like RFRA, Religious Freedom Restoration Act, has been in place since the 80s, but it wasn't until around 2006 to 2009 that an ayahuasca church made it to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court said, absolutely, you are protected under RFRA. The DEA, they defeated the DEA and the federal government at the federal level. And after that, the DEA or the Supreme Court ordered the DEA to create an exemption process for individuals who use plant medicine, controlled substances as a sincere religious practice. So they did. They put out about a 1.5-page document. And then it wasn't until Gaia's approval in 2025, 24. It was 24. Time's moving quickly. It was until 2024 that an approval finally went through. And so Church of Gaia was the first one to make it through that whole process. And so that's kind of RFRA at a super high level. What are your thoughts on that, Connor?
Yeah, at a very high level, that is definitely it. It was honestly quite a monotonous process to go through the entire thing because as I'm sure Taylor could maybe talk about a little bit, it felt like as we were going through the process that the process was kind of being made up as we went along. It was, since it was, nobody had been through the process before it, and we came very, very prepared, overly prepared, I would say, to the process, which is probably why we were able to even come and move through the process, was just being extremely over prepared. It definitely felt for months, if not years, that new questions would appear that were new or repetitive or however it may have been, because it definitely every step of the way felt like, Okay, we're not sure what we're doing. Let's look at this through a medical landscape. Okay, we're not sure what we're doing. Let's look through this through a traditional religious landscape. It wasn't clean and clear cut, but I do think the good thing about Gaia getting through is that it kind of defined the future of religious exemptions for other churches in the future, because I feel like it kind of made the process a lot cleaner for the next churches that go through, because they already know what they're going to ask. They've asked it to us 15 times.
Going back to what you just said about like, the questions and things like that. For context, Connor submitted an incredibly robust petition that met the requirements of the guidance document that they put out, which, by the way, it's about a page and a half, and it's, tells us why is your belief sincere, why it's burdened, security protocols, safety protocols, yada yada. And then there was very little else compared to what the DEA has put out for psychedelic or controlled substance manufacturers, researchers, practitioners, pharmacists. It has whole manuals that line things up. Like, here's exactly what goes into your application. Here's exactly what this process looks like with timelines. And there's no such thing for the religious exemption. And so, for us on the legal team, which was led by Pat Donahue, for the first several years of this, who started Terrapin, and it was kind of like, all of that information was submitted, but there was a level of interpreting it and translating it into something the DEA could understand, right? They, like Connor said, they were definitely overlaying a medical research, more rigid model onto the spiritual, which is inherently ineffable. One of the examples that was used was, or that I've used is, Connor, do you remember the destruction policy?
Oh, I do.
So the DEA sends us an email and says, "Hey, what's your destruction policy for the ayahuasca?" And Connor, what was your initial reaction to that, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, I remember when I think it was Pat originally emailed me for what's your destruction policy, and I was like, what are you talking about? Nobody destroys like sacrament. Nobody destroys ayahuasca. It lasts forever. What's the point? Like, what for what? For what? That was really my response. And how dare you even think it's acceptable for me to just destroy a bunch of ayahuasca? I mean, ayahuasca vine takes 7 years to grow before it's harvestable. Chacruna takes 6. And you think I'm going to brew all this ayahuasca and then I'm just going to destroy it? You gotta be out of your mind.
Yeah. And there's always, so there can be bad batches or mold gets on it and things like that. And there does need to be the shifting, right? But, the concept of destroying something that is inherently sacred is an example of how the model that they're overlaying doesn't quite work. Maybe, and the terminology is a little adverse to the situation. But in the end, Connor, if it's okay to share, like what we ended up landing on was a ceremonial burial of returning the ayahuasca to the earth and then being, witnessed by 2 people and reflected in the record and record keeping logs, right? So, and then the DEA was able to kind of like check their box. They were like, oh, okay, great, they have a destruction policy. And so that's a lot of what we found that they're looking for. And in the time that's passed, I collected, Connor, every question that they asked, every follow-up, and like tracked what was going on. And it's the more I look at it, the more they are overlaying that. But then it also kind of creates an algorithm for how to move through these in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one thing I think was interesting about how we came so prepared, because we came with, a binder of policies. And it was definitely that feeling of like, okay, they're building a way to ask these questions, and they would ask questions and we'd be like, okay, well, you can check our policy folder, because they weren't prepared for us to come forward with so many policies. And it's like, it's in there, it's on this page, this is where it is. We already have a policy built around that. So
Per
it
our
was like,
last email.
yeah, per last email or per the giant folder I gave you when I first met you, it's all in there. And that
Mhm.
I think was a benefit to our process, but also kind of hindering their building because they weren't like really looking through it and seeing what policies we had. Like they hadn't obviously completely memorized it because it is dense, but I just don't think I think it was very beneficial, but also it was just kind of a headache to be like, we already did that. It's in here. We already did that. It's in here. It's been 3 months since a month since you emailed me last, and guess what? It's already in there.
And there's a balance too of teaching, 'cause like this was one of the first major ones that went through. There's a couple other in process now. There was the Soul Quest inspection that was wild, when you look at constitutional violations that happened within it. Um, but there just really wasn't a proper template. The only like even, who knows what the DEA was working on, but I know what I was working off of was all the case law surrounding plant medicine law I could get my hands on. And that's difficult because, the legal system is different from the administrative process, right? And each one of those is fact specific and didn't actually hit and give us precedent on all the nuances. Everything is so case by case. And so it's hard to overlay the exact same model onto things. So then it became this accumulation of all of this mixing case law from different circuits, from different interpretations, and then looking at the era that things were done in. In some of the early case law, one of the arguments the DEA was putting forth was they had a compelling interest in adhering to international treaties. Now, I'd like to see the US try to make that argument today. Whether they could, in the past, right, is a different thing as well. But they've dropped that argument because, the court said, hey, I don't remember all the specifics as to why they dropped it, but they were like, well, there's exemptions for peyote, there's exemptions here, there's exemptions here. And they're not putting forth that argument as much, right? But in the time that I've spent in the last, 2 years working with other groups going through the process, I've learned even more types of questions that the DEA asks that Connor are also just as off the wall sometimes.
Mhm.
And so as part of it, I'm like, they're learning. Part of it is potentially stalling tactics because this is an agency that doesn't necessarily want to give these exemptions. Their job is enforcement, and they're not necessarily qualified to do it. And it's so delicate because it's First Amendment rights. So there's a lot of mixing things at play when it comes to it. But I do think that how complete your petition was and how solid and how genuine you are is part of what made that happen.
Yeah, and I also found that really, honestly, extremely convoluted in our process because I was looking into, the international treaty rules at one point and how to meet that regulation standard. And part of it was getting approval from an indigenous organization in Peru or wherever you work out of to have approval from the indigenous that originally work with ayahuasca. And I was like, okay, let's do this. Let's figure out how to do this. But there's 7, 8, 9 different Shipibo organizations. There's no head of we are like the leader of the Shipibo organization because it's broke down to colonies in small areas. And there's yes, there's like a leader essentially of this small village or this small village, and getting the overall consensus from the Shipibo indigenous group that's 80,000 people strong. It's like you can't. Am I supposed to get a petition and get 80,000 people to sign it, and then I got to get their kids to sign it too because it's the future of their lives too? And it was just so convoluted. It's like this doesn't even seem like physically possible. Like I don't know how to get consensus from everybody because I have consensus from my teachers. I have consensus from the people that I work with. Is that enough for the DEA? Or do I have to go to every organization and talk to every organization and get consensus from them? It was just really confusing. So I do like that as part of it. Truthfully, I do. I think that's really important to have consensus from the people you work with and have consensus from the indigenous group that you work with, and having that, ability to be accepted to do the things that you're trying to do, to share, you know, their traditional medicine that they've worked with forever. But also it is such a weird gray area that that's a really, really hard one. So the fact that they're not asking that maybe means they, you know, thought about it a little bit farther.
I think it's more likely they haven't thought about it because they don't
That's
know, you
yeah.
know, and realistically, under first, I would be so interested in a case involving that because it's such, you know, arguably such incredible overreach of the DEA's permissions and what they're able to do, right? They're not lawfully able to like go overstep and demand that. I think that any argument they put forth in that would be rather be interesting. But then
Yeah.
at the same time, you know, it's like this process wasn't set up with reciprocity, lineage, apprenticeship in mind, right?
Mhm.
You know, really, there really wasn't any questions around there. Like I've never encountered them having questions around, okay, well, how long have you studied? And have you, you know, what does the mentorship and apprenticeship process look like? What have your rites of passage or initiation? Which they really can't ask. That's religiosity. But it's
Mhm.
also so integral to serving that medicine in the plant medicine space, you know, having permission, having training, you know, just going in and serving without that connection, in my opinion, is generally violative of the lineage, medicine
I
itself.
100% agree with you. And
Yeah.
that's honestly why when, you know, people talk, obviously this is jumping out of the religious framework, but when we're reaching over to like the medical framework and the therapist framework, you know, they're doing these crash courses of 8 weeks of training to administer psilocybin or whatever it is, or ketamine, whatever you pick whatever sacrament you wish. That it's where's the lineage, where's the training, you know, where's the songs, where's the ceremony that has been with this sacrament forever. And then it's
Mhm.
like, no, you can just do a crash course, 8 week training. You don't even need to take the substance, whatever it is, and then you can just
20
give
grand for the 8 weeks.
yeah, 20 grand for 8 weeks, and boom, now you can administer whatever sacrament. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
never how this has been done.
And it's, you know, there's the interesting thing with the therapeutic spiritual interplay that I see is, you know, I very much believe that if one is holding the space, really truly holding that space and integrity, you have to have a relationship with the medicines themselves, right? Whether
Absolutely.
you're in a therapeutic container, or spiritual container or research container.
Mhm.
How, you know, when really complex things come up, are how are you able to relate to the person in front of you and support them through that journey, you know, non-directive, you know, not letting your own personal energies, biases, all the things that we come along with as humans, right? How can you just hold that person in that space? And that takes a relationship with the medicine, sitting in ceremony, sitting in session. But then you run into the problem of even doing that in the first place violates the Controlled Substances Act, right?
Mhm.
And so all these programs are going through, and it's, you know, there's kind of like nudge, nudge, wink, wink, like there's no they're not required to, they're not hosting medicine ceremonies because they're not allowed to legally for the most part. Some groups do what they want to do, but at least the more reputable ones that I'm aware of, or they have to go to another country. And that's, you know, cost prohibitive. It can't happen as often. There's so much nuance in it, but one needs to be able to hold that container. And,
Mhm.
you know, it's one, you know, one of the big issues the DEA has is if somebody's been serving the medicine stateside, then, you know, that's freely admitting to violating the US law, right? Which technically can be grounds for denial of a petition, depending on all the facts involved. And, but at the same time, how else would one get the experience to do it well without the ability to travel and move? And it's complex.
Yeah, and you know, having that lineage and having those teachers near you that can really take you into the depths of these sacraments is so incredibly important. And that's another, obviously this is my time to talk about the
Yeah, still
therapeutic model, but as you know, somebody who has worked with lineage
it was signed in. It was in the calendar.
and have been taken into those extreme depths with my teachers. And it wasn't until recently, when we were holding a ceremony group, that someone went into a world that we call the Panchinete, the world of medicine, that is excessively strong. And there's and I wouldn't have known how to hold that space unless I had been there, more than once, multiple times. And it is not generally the new people that do just pop in there, but occasionally they do. And without extreme practice, I wouldn't have known how to hold that space for a person that was, so lost and so confused in that space. And, it can happen really with any sacrament if things are situated just correctly. And you need that lineage, and you need that teaching and that time on the mat to really learn how to do these things, because it takes a very long time.
Yeah. Long live our mentors.
Mm-hmm.
I consider that to be, a red flag when I don't, as an attorney representing folk in this space and all kinds of, not just spiritual, but in research and therapy and, more informal coaching, is when somebody reports not having a mentorship or some form of learning and growing under the direction and like moving in that. I consider that a red flag, because I think that we've already seen there's so many ethical issues, and it requires holding so much space and being so deep within one's integrity and one's ability to hold that container again and manage their own projections and transference and all the things. And not all mentors are great, right? But if somebody doesn't have any form of mentorship and connection, if it's just kind of on their own recreationally, which is fine, they can put whatever they want in their bodies and do the thing. But once you start stepping into the realm of holding space for others, to me, the duty increases, the responsibility increases. And I think it's a giant red flag if I don't see that understanding reflected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a big issue with the petition process, is we're talking about safety and security. And I can write 1,000 policies to make something look safe, but the fact of the matter is, without mentorship, without guidance for years and years, I mean, a typical ayahuasquero in Peru, it's going to take 20 years before they start working directly with people. It's at a bare minimum 10 of diet before they start working with people. But, if I write 1,000 policies, technically anybody could get approved if they can write policies well enough and they can answer questions. And that is a big barrier and a big issue that I see, because if you don't have lineage and you don't have connections, then what are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of pushes over to why it's taken the church so long to actually get to the point of holding ceremonies, is due to the fact of another legal landscape, which is the visa process. Because I work directly with the Shipibo, and my goal and the goal of the church has always been to allow, the Shipibo, who this is, their indigenous medicine, this is what they've been working with, this is what they've trained with since they were as young as babies, sometimes 8, sometimes 12, to put in 20, 30 years of experience to be able to hold these ceremonies. And those are the people that we work with, and we want their voices heard in our ceremonies here, because it's of extreme importance that the lineage is continued and they're allowed to share their medicine in the United States. And it is not just us up here doing our thing. And religious visas are extremely complicated, and they are not necessarily invented for this new form of church that is happening in the States. It's just, they want really interesting documents that indigenous cultures don't have. Like, oh, show me a documented list of where they went to school to learn how to be a pastor. It's like, well, you spend 30 years in the jungle in diet and isolation, I'm not going to have documents for that. Like, that's not a thing. I can't show you that. Just really interesting new legal landscape to lock in so we can figure out how to hold our ceremonies the way we believe they have to be held.
Yeah, and overall it's when I studied indigenous law in the US, one of the things that continuously came up was how do we integrate ancestral and cultural knowledge into the US legal frameworks, right? How do we integrate? And the US system is really just not built for it because it's not quantitative, it's qualitative. And US legal system wants boxes checked, it wants forms, it wants things filed in triplicate. It's a glacial behemoth of a system, and it's just not quite ready for it. And so, looking at the R1 visa, trying to get R1 visas for your people, it's looking to me like it's going through a whole nother administrative process with a whole nother agency with a whole nother set of evaluation principles.
The thing that blew my mind, here's my soapbox. So even if I prepare all the documents perfectly, it's perfect. I got everything. Let's say I got everything to a T. Obviously, I can't do the paperwork part of this is where they went to school to become a curandero. That's never going to happen. But I have everything prepared. It's beautiful. The thing being, even though legally in the States, I am allowed to have ayahuasca, I'm allowed to have these ceremonies through, our approval process. Once that Shipibo person goes to the consulate in Peru to have that discussion, and they have the paperwork that comes in front of them, and it says, we are the Church of Gaia, we have legal approval for ayahuasca, and this is the person we're trying to bring in, blah, blah, blah. It just saying ayahuasca is enough for the consulate to stamp a no on there, even though it's completely legal for us. But the consulate makes all the decisions. And if they stamp a no on that paperwork, it's over. There's no legal battle. I can't take them to court. It's just a no now. And then I was also, when I was discussing with the attorney, if they do stamp an approval and that person then flies into the States, they can then be stopped at the airport and they can tell them to turn around and go home because they're here for ayahuasca ceremonies, which is a substance, even though it's completely legal. We're doing everything legit and above board. It does not matter. Those are more barriers preventing indigenous use and practice of ayahuasca in the States. It's just more barriers. And we get approved for what's seen as like the biggest, hardest part. And then it's just more legal frames stacking up to be another hindrance. So it's just trying to figure out how to do everything legally, and which is the safest way for our participants, and not only our participants, but of our Shipibo teachers. So they are working in a landscape that is safe and secure and not a dangerous environment for them to be in legally. And it's just constantly convoluted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody here have questions on any things we've kind of touched on or haven't?
I have a couple, but I would leave, if anyone else has any, I'd prioritize those. Okay. I guess this is jumping back a second, but I was just curious earlier on when you said you were like basically over prepared for the process, because a lot of times I feel like that's the only way for these things to actually work out. But do you feel like because of this specific issue you're dealing with the DEA that they expected you to be less prepared than you were because of any kind of stigma against people who are using these kind of like medicines or what they would view as just like drugs? Was there any sense of them, I don't know, expecting that less preparation?
100%, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because when I first met with the DEA, I had my storage and security set up. I had, you know, a giant binder of policies. And when I handed her the binder of policies and all the things, mind you, this is one person, right? So you have one person for Washington, you have one person for wherever else, whatever other state that goes around and tries to do these. And I can't imagine she's seen a million people. I could be wrong. Maybe she has talked to, you know, a bunch of different churches. But I remember when I handed her the documents and showed her my security and all this, and she's like, we've never seen anything like this. Never. The DEA loves this. This is exactly what we're looking for. We've never seen it. I'm like, but how many churches have you really gone to? Like, you guys aren't approving people. Like, I could be wrong. Maybe you are seeing a lot more people. But I was like, okay, that's good. Or maybe people are coming in extremely unprepared because, you know, I do have the privy of, you know, other people preparing for trying to start the legal process that do reach out to me and talk to me relatively frequently. And yeah, I found a lot of people that want to seek an approval through this process, and they're either just talking to me because I'm the first name that popped up, or they're just, you know, not quite as prepared as we came into it, because we spent, I can't tell you how many hours before we even started reaching for an approval of research and reading and case study and everything, as if we were lawyers that had no education in the actual legal space.
You did great.
Thank you.
You did great. Yeah, I mirror Connor. In my experience, there were a lot of the petitions that I've seen make sense to I think a non-lawyer, that like, this is what, you know, I'm meeting the criteria, but knowing this area of law and knowing, you know, how to maneuver with the DEA, I'm like, okay, we need to overhaul, start from scratch, right? And what I do oftentimes with clients is I work with mostly spiritual communities and churches, is we do a full RFRA audit and analysis. And, you know, that's always where we start, is making sure policies and procedures are aligned under RFRA and doing risk management and things along those lines. And for clients that want to submit a petition, the process takes 6 months to a year to even get to the part where we're drafting, because of how thorough the process is. Because for me, you know, as an attorney, I want to make sure that I'm protecting my people, and I'm not going to submit something to a government agency unless it's really, really solid, right? And that we can withstand a legal scrutiny around it, because you're giving the government a whole heck of a lot of information. And then there's, you know, making sure that everything that's said on paper actually aligns with what's going on in practice, right? Because vulnerabilities between the two can be extremely detrimental. And then, you know, so that's just to get to the part where starting a petition, you know, 6 months to a year, 6 months for a group that, I mean, really is dialed, has the idea, the whole thing. And then, you know, for the petition part, it's, you know, where you can, I think I, at this point, can get that timeline down quite a bit from 3 years. But once it leaves our hands, it leaves our control, and we're kind of subject to whatever's going on when following the true petition process. You know, there can be shifts into litigation and various things that can happen, but the whole thing just gets really complex. And the amount of information one needs to have is so substantial.
Can I ask a question? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So more directed at Connor. Anyway, Tim Shimaleski, I'm up in Toronto, Canada, and doing that. So there's differences between Canadian and American jurisdictions and legal systems and so much more. Do you ever find that you're just giving them information and so they can prepare their counter arguments? Or do they actually take what you provide and debate, like review it in good-heartedness, like with beneficence, like, or do you just kind of give them the information? They're like, no, 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 no.
It wasn't so much a no, it was more of an education as to why, is what it felt like. Because we were, like we talked about, how it was, they were so prepared for research, they were so prepared for everything that wasn't the religious lens, that when I would make a statement about something, or for instance, dosage, They were very specific on like, okay, how much are we going to give every participant, which in a research lens that makes sense, right? Because then we're testing, okay, how much of this substance does it take for every single person in the whole planet, right?
Right.
We're going to give this much. But in our context and in the way we work in Peru, dosage depends person to person,
Right.
right? Because, I may take, a tiny amount, but I've been working with ayahuasca for years and years and years, where it might take you 5 times, 6 times as much as me to reach the same place, because
Right.
it takes years of practice and connection and cleaning to get to the point where you need significantly less. So it was just, educating them that dosage doesn't depend on weight and height and this and that. It depends. It's a multifaceted amount of spiritual factors. And there is no specific dose person to person.
We're not we're not at precise care in the regular world anyway. Like, we just give people what the protocol is for whatever drug they need based on, like you said, age, weight, gender, whatever. But most studies are based on masculine subject models anyway. So how did they receive it then? Like, I'm just going to use this context. How did they perceive that there's so many variables? It's just based on a feeling. Like it's subjective. Like, how did it?
That was pretty much it. I just gave them like rough numbers, and I gave them a really high dose number. That was just like, this isn't going to happen, but let's give them this really, really high number.
Okay.
Because whatever, if you need it to check a box, check a box. I'm going to give you this insanely high number that I'm not going to give anybody. And then that gives us space to work how we work. Because sure, I'm not going to give somebody for their first dose, you're never going to need 3 shot glasses of ayahuasca. It's just not going to happen, because we don't do that. Sure, maybe throughout the night you might need that, but for your first dose, I'm not just going to be like, oh, here you go, here's all this ayahuasca. You're not going to need that. And so it was really just like fitting their boxes and explaining to them, there is no dose specific amount that's going to work. That's just not how it works.
No, and
so it was just trying to educate them. But then when it was like, no, we need like a thing, it's like, sure, let's give you some random numbers, even when it comes to, brewing ayahuasca. And they would be like, okay, well, how much water is going here and how much water is going here? Or how much plant material versus how much water? And that's when it was like, dude, we don't measure anything. I don't know. Like, as much water as we put in, or, it's very, very common. And it's how we typically is, we'll cook ayahuasca down to a paste, right? And we call it chocolate, right? So paste. And then you take the paste and you put it in hot water and you make your drinkable ayahuasca, right? And they're like, well, how much paste do you put in to how much water? I don't know. It depends on the night. Sometimes it's thicker, sometimes it's thinner. And they're just like, but how much? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not going to give you a number. I'm not going to give you an amount, because it's an eyeball thing. You look, you see how it pours off the spoon. Nobody measures. It's until it's right. And they're like, okay. That one they actually were chill with, surprisingly, because
I'd add some context to that one too.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I think that the specific things that Connor mentioned are part of spiritual beliefs, religious exercise, and so part of it was explaining that to them. Like the DEA calls it manufacture, right? Which is but the preparation, the creation is from growing the vines to harvesting the vines to the whole process is a spiritual activity, right? That is inherently sacred. But it fits into the DEA's concept of manufacturing. And so, there did need to be like certain boxes checked type of thing. But part of it was explaining to them that this is a ritualistic process and a part of sincere religious exercise. And so, we can't regulate it in a specific way. And so, but they were fine when we gave them the numbers, right? And part of it is just the boxes getting checked. But if it had been something along the lines of like, let's say Church of Gaia didn't screen members, right? That would be a really hard one for the DEA if there was no screening, right? So if that was the policy, if there was really substantial spiritual belief practice behind it, maybe it could work in a lawsuit, but it wouldn't work in this process. But you have to think about, like, does it bump into the DEA's compelling interests? And if so, what is being done to mitigate anything, right? So, making sure that if something does implicate one of their interests, then we can create policies, procedures, and make agreements around how to make sure that's not a true issue.
Okay, thanks. I had this visions like when you talk about the Catholic wafer you get, how much paste do you, what do you make it with? Tell me your recipe, that type of thing. It's just that same irony. Do they question it there or not really? Paint the picture for me. What does it look like when you meet? Is it like in a boardroom, or are they in suits, or are they like, what does it resemble?
So I mean, you meet them typically. I think I only met them in person once, and it was to figure out storage and security and stuff. And other than that, it was all by email.
Oh,
99.5% was done by email, I
wow.
would say.
Okay.
And phone calls, but that was to the legal team. I never did a phone call with the DEA, thankfully.
Yeah, it looks a little different depending on who your DEA divergent investigator is, where they're based, and who's managing the
Mhm.
case. So I've supported groups who are interfacing directly with headquarters, right? Particular people who might be East Coast, right? We had a local field office, and from my understanding, what was happening was our diversion investigator would ask the questions and was our interface, and then that information would then they would collect the information and then send it off to headquarters, and then headquarters said something back. It was kind of like this liaison process, whereas I've worked with people who are interfacing directly with headquarters or will do more in-person meetings if they're close by, right? If they're based in the area that they're headquartered. So it looks different depending on where you are.
Okay. That's cool.
I feel like that would be such a faster process too if you were just interfacing directly with headquarters instead of playing telephone.
We can't do that, Connor. We
Oh,
have to put people in the middle. Just the way
yeah.
it is, right?
I'll let you know how it turns out.
Yeah, please do, because I'm so curious.
Is there like now a branch, like a specific branch, but a branch of the DA that deals strictly with attends to these matters and is becoming like a known entity, or is it still kind of like a sporadic, you get who you get, don't get upset type thing? Like, have they carved out a niche for this area yet, or?
That's a little opaque at the moment.
Well, I was just thinking, like, who does Maps talk with, or is there any similarities in these areas?
There's overlap. Maps would be likely working more specifically with the FTA. I don't know the
Fair.
nuance
Okay.
of how they do things, but there's also power differentials we have to think about in terms of how things get managed, right? Like, this was a grassroots effort from the ground up,
Okay.
right? Versus an organization that has funders and a big board of directors and, has the ability to have a team of attorneys moving through and working with the various aspects. And so I think that plays a role too, is the power differential.
That's fair. Yeah. Who your individuals that can support.
Yeah.
Okay.
My hope is whoever is working with Maps is experienced and knowledgeable in the area, because that's way what they deserve.
And that's fair. Yeah, there's definitely two different views, like substances, medicines in this case. So just trying to understand uh the government agencies that seem to influence a lot of the decision making in all this. Like, you know, I applaud your patience and your tenacity.
It's a long time.
Yeah, I was so patient.
If that's what we call it. So kudos to you. It's, as a friend said, what happens when you stop banging your head against the wall? I'm like, no, he says the headaches go away. So, but that to do it all by email and exchange, like that's time consuming and operative and commitment. So good for you.
Yeah, the thing that ended up happening was we would send the email back within, two days, normally maybe a week if the questions were more complex and required more nuance. And then it would be sometimes 3 months until we got a reply. And sometimes then it would be more questions that had already been answered. And so, there's It just added so much time.
Well, it goes into the vacuum, and you wonder if it's even received by anybody, or if it gets acknowledged, or it just, okay, we just kind of sit on our hands for whatever, right? And that for me would be, I find that part difficult, just the not knowing. And unless they communicate and say, yeah, we got it, we'll review it, we'll get back to you, that type of thing. I don't know. How does it work?
And the lack of timeline was
The lack of timeline.
horrible, because they're like, we're going to have you approved this summer. A year goes. Okay, this summer.
It's sitting in the
A
chief
year
counsel's
goes.
office.
Yeah, and it was
Still sitting in the chief counsel's office.
And then we could all tell when it was like actually almost there, because then
Right.
we're just getting flooded with constant this, that, and the other thing. And then it was all of a sudden one day I just got a phone call from Pat, and he's like, "We did it."
Amazing.
What? What do you mean we did it?
Oh, that's
Did
cool.
it feel like like all of the red tape and the lack of timelines and the process being this grueling, is that there like to deter people at all, do you think? Or at this point, is it more of just like it's not their priority and they're not really I don't know, addressing it?
I think it's a lot of things. And
Mhm.
I genuinely like to believe the best in people. And there's a lot of individuals within that group who are operating in a system that, again, does not want to grant these, does not want to do it. And it's not high priority, right? At the time that the petition was, in the chief counsel's office, there were some major political things going on that the DOJ was dealing with, right? There was tons of upheaval and shifting in the US political system, and their office was busy, right? So there's that. And then there's also, when we look at case law, Church Legal and the Condor, Ocentro, Santo Daime, the record, when you look at the timing on their records, the DEA is oftentimes submitting things at the 11th hour, right? Waiting till the last minute, like, how long can we do this? And the DEA has affirmatively said in a recent case, they don't really have a duty to do this on a reasonable timeline, which the right case will overturn this. And there's some hopefully gaining traction, because the timing issue, the fact that Gaia was not able to practice for over 3 years, and other groups, like there's one that's been in litigation for 7, in and out of the process and haven't been able to practice. That is inherently a substantial burden on religion. But, with US case law, you need the right set of facts, the right attorneys who can see through the mist and make it happen. And responding, oftentimes needs to be financial resources present. Government agencies have a ton of money that they can just throw behind, saying no, and they can financially exhaust people. So I'd like to say it's not one thing, but it's multiple things interweaving.
Did you ever think you're gonna have a template that can be adhered
Oh, I
to,
have
and
one.
it streams like, oh, you already okay, well, just take that
But-
question back.
But what's interesting is it's more of a framework, because
Yeah, I don't know what the
you
wording would be.
yeah, because everything is case by case. So you can't just say, the government's really clear. You can't just say, I'll have what they're having, right? If it was, all ayahuasca churches would be legal in the country after 2009. But basically, like, I've sensed through all the clients I've worked with, I've developed a framework of what would work, but also it needs to be exact to their practices as well. Something that says one thing on paper, but is different in practice will not hold, right? And so it's pretty comprehensive to be able to get the amount of information required to begin drafting that stuff and to be able to translate and articulate it to a way the DEA can understand. So it's more of a framework than a template.
Yeah, okay. And doing
Yeah.
it. But it could be, I'm going to use this loosely, replicable based on the framework. And then it gives structure to what didn't have structure previously.
That's what I've created, is something that could fit a number of different types of communities.
Cool. Nice.
Yeah, and medicines.
Good job.
The key thing is just making it happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Very good. And my question's answered.
Yeah, I guess it's like the framework you're talking about, but I liked when you used the word algorithm earlier. I think in reference to the same kind of thing, and I was wondering what the steps forward might be, like, as not just for Gaia, but like all kind of like people hoping to have these kind of religious freedoms, like on working together to build this algorithm. Because it seems like
Mhm.
another thing you referenced was like the the paradigm that the DEA and the US government has. It's so difficult to find bridges of communication that actually make the conversation intelligible to both parties, I feel. And so, yeah, I guess I'm basically just asking like what steps forward might be to, on a large scale, make this process more feasible for all kinds of organizations.
Well, there is a lawsuit getting underway with the Sacred Plan Alliance to
Mm,
some incredible folk working on it who are working to amend to have the government change the process by which they evaluate these. So that's one. And yeah, they're in those stages, and I highly recommend people taking a look and, donating to the cause because they're doing huge work. And there's also, the one thing that I always say is community is the key and getting your ducks in a row. Like most of the people I work with have no interest in submitting a petition, but we get their ducks in a row. Like, let's make sure that you are aligned under RFRA and like make this process, safe, like in a way that if something were to happen, legal liability wise, government wise, let's make sure that you're solid, and a lot of that comes from just evaluating practices, really doing deep intrapersonal work, creating systems. Some of it is SOP work and left brain, logical, and other parts of it. I'm asking people to pull out bits of their heart and soul and tell me about it to help them build, sincere, like articulate the sincerity of their practices. Because again, it's translation. So I just tell everyone, get your ducks in a row. And there's great resources out there. The Charkruna RFRA Best Practices Guide broke down really complex law into human terms and is an excellent resource for groups who are starting to get those ducks together. And there's community groups. There's so much going on now that can help. And being in community with people, one of the things I look for is have a council of sorts where you talk about ethical concerns and spiritual practice. And like having a council keeps everyone accountable. It helps with growth, it protects the community, you. I think first about like the best way to protect yourself is to protect your people. The people and the relationships you form are always the first line. The legal paperwork, the waivers of indemnification, informed consent, that is plan C, right?
mhm,
That's like if but the way that you conduct practices, the way that you develop relationships will always be the strongest form of protection.
mhm, mhm.
I would say definitely I still think there needs at some point, hopefully there's some work done towards a religious visa that actually fits this category because I have personally talked to people that have been rated with Shipibo maestros there. And now we have somebody on a tourist visa coming into a sacred ceremony, just like they do at home in a completely legal landscape. And they don't understand the legal process here. How would they? It's it's the same thing. I could ask any of you. Tell me about marijuana legalization in Peru. Let's talk about it. You're not going to know anything about it. So they come up here, they're told they're coming into a legal space, or maybe they understand that it's slightly legal, but they don't understand how illegal. And so they're coming into this space, getting arrested, being taken away from their family to do something that they either see as completely illegal or they don't understand the legal ramifications of their practice. Maybe they're on a tourist visa and then they're getting hit with getting paid on a tourist visa. This entirely complicated legal process that we have here that isn't protecting Shipibo maestros that are coming from other countries to do what is completely legal where they're from. And I think something needs to happen there as well.
Yeah. I don't know, Connor, you got another 3 years and we can do it.
Yeah, could we? You think we can tackle the visa people next? Might as
Yeah,
well
why
keep
not?
going. Maybe I
in all
do.
of our free time.
Yeah, I'm only 32. I got a lot of life left. Why not?
Nice. Well, I have a question. I was thinking, so you guys have talked a lot about the institutional resistance, the departmental resistance, all like the, jumping through all the hoops like we were talking about, like what Tim was talking about, like all the red tape. Could you guys speak a little bit to, I don't know what I would call it, like if there's any cultural resistance, or I think like the people-to-people interactions, both, you talked a little bit about the very infrequent meetings that you had with people in the government, but I was wondering just in like the grander scheme of the United States culture, how is it received that you guys were doing this activity? Because being like the first of anything, it's a big deal. So if you can speak to that a little bit, that'd be wonderful.
That's all
You
you,
want to
Connor.
start, Taylor? Oh, you want me to do it?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
I would say it's hard. It was a weird space, especially at the beginning, because um I mean, a lot of places or people that I talked to were like, what are you doing putting any amount of your process in the hands of the government? This is not for them. This is religiosity. This is spirituality. They have no hands in this process. What you're doing is a mistake for all of us. And I looked at that and I'm like, okay, I understand where you're coming from and not wanting the DEA to be a part of this, but I have 2 children and a community to protect. And I looked at it as, how am I making this a safe process, a safe religion for my community, for my children, for everybody around me? And the only way to do that is within the bounds of the law. We can all practice outside of the law, and I could open an underground church and I could, brew ayahuasca and do that whole thing. But when the DEA comes knocking, I'm the one who has to answer for that. My community are the ones that have to answer for that. My teachers that come from Peru are the ones that have to answer to that. And I'm not protecting anybody. Then the whole ship comes crumbling down and everything's done and everybody's going to prison. So I can either act within the bounds of the law and I can go through the extremely rigorous legal pathway. And that was really the only thing that I saw that was just in the way that I practice, is making sure that I do this to make sure it's safe for everybody involved, because that is what I saw as just. And a lot of people didn't like it, but that's okay. People aren't always going to like what you do. And that was just the only way forward for our church personally.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was interesting like discourse in some of the communities that I'm in around, the process in general and like whether going through the process validates it or not, right? And it was more broadly speaking rather than directed per se at Gaia. And I think that because there's a great argument that the whole process itself is unconstitutional, right?
Absolutely.
And there was nuance to working with that. And, especially with Connor being Gaia being the first one to go through, everyone is like, how the heck did you do it? Right? What happened? And I know for me, people are asking me all these questions, and I'm like, I can talk to you about this process, but I'm not going to talk to you about Gaia outside of anything that is publicly available, because that's one, violates confidentiality and just not Connor's wish. Right. And so there is nuance to managing how that all goes, because people are curious. They want to know all the details. They're used to case law where everything is public information, right? Like, you go on to the court listener pages and you get to know somebody's whole trauma history that led to their spiritual journey, and it's just there in a legal document. And going through this process, we didn't have to do that. These aren't public filings, right? It's not people's business. And so there was some culture shift around that, because everyone was so used to having such an incredible amount of information, being appraised of what's going along the way, in the councils I sit in, the boards, every time a new case drops, we're all looking at it, we're dissecting it piece by piece. Whereas there were a handful of attorneys in the space that knew that we were in this, but nobody really knew the fine details. And so that was kind of a culture thing of,
Mhm.
nobody knew what was going on. And that's fair, I think. And also, I don't think the precedent needs to be that everyone knows everything. There's knowledge they can gain from the process and how it applies to them and like how to go through it successfully, but they don't need to know your whole history if it's not something that wants to get shared in that container.
Mhm.
No, thank you very much.
Um, I'm wondering, like, also around how many other organizations have successfully gone through this process at this point. Um, and is that like accelerating?
So I've heard rumor of another one, but I have yet to confirm. It might just be another group that likes to practice quietly, or, it
Mhm.
might not be true. I'm not sure. I know that there's several others in process and it is moving more efficiently. It's still glacial, but most of the folk who've received federal permission have had to engage in litigation in some way. Most of them have been getting settled, things like that, because with a strong case, the government just can't win these, right? And so two have recently settled, I believe. I know one at some point is likely, if it's not already done in its final iteration of a settlement. Um, there's another that's going to take a little bit longer, but they're in process. But to my knowledge, only Gaia, potentially another. Or it could also just be folk who, there could be many more who just keep practicing quietly to themselves. We don't know.
Okay, yeah. Seems like over the coming few years, there's going to be more clarity around all of this. Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, that's the hope. Um, Especially if the Sacred Plant Alliance lawsuit gains traction because they've they've got some good stuff. Moving it's so challenging because it just takes so much resources. It takes so much time and energy and expertise and dedication and like the willingness to sit for 3 years, right?
Hmm.
That was substantial. It takes so much. And I think the more, community getting behind it, following like standards of practice, everyone's particular practices are going to be different, right? The Icaros sung in one area could be different, are different through transmission and lineage and personal practice. And Santo Daime differs from Shipibo. The practices differ, but there's common underpinnings to all that can help the critical, I think about critical mass. Like, the more separated, disparate, if there's inter-arguing, it weakens us all as a whole. Whereas I would love to see more people coming together and discussing and bridge building. Like I think that um, research has something significant to learn from the spiritual container and the harm reduction container, and the medical container has things to learn from spiritual, and then recreational container. I think all of the containers have something to teach the other, and they should each have like a seat at the table to help move things along.
No, I agree with that. Absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, so like kind of going further into that, like a few of us are in religious studies, so I can definitely think of a few ways that the medical and like therapeutic containers could benefit from dialogue with the spiritual side of things. Beyond like the legitimization of uh psychedelics, I'll just use the term crudely, but like um what do you find that the medical and kind of like therapeutic side has had to offer on the religious side of things?
Connor, do you have any
Um,
thoughts on this?
yeah, medication contraindications, right? That's huge.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
huge. That's huge, huge, huge. Because we are in the States and medications are used heavily. So medication contraindications for DMT, especially, right? We know all of our antidepressants, amongst many other things. That's a huge piece of knowledge that we are very, very fortunate to have. I would say psychological disorders in conjunction with many different psychedelics are not compatible depending on the psychological condition. That's huge. And then also they you can even get into the nitty gritty with certain illnesses, whether it be like heart failure or anything like that, having also issues with, you look at the medical studies with DMT and the effects on the body and how it affects, your heart rate and different things. That's great knowledge to have. And we can't set that aside and say that's not wonderful to have, especially being a religious organization that deals with all kinds of people. So that's an extreme benefit that we just didn't have before. So I think that's great. We definitely get a benefit from that. And I once again, I think, the therapeutic lens can learn a lot from spirituality as well. And they also go into those places with that beauty of, the medical side of things and knowing their contraindications. So we all have wonderful insights into how these things should be done. But yeah, I don't think none of us can do it alone. That's for sure. It's definitely a little bit of everything brings in the whole piece of the puzzle of working in beauty and safety.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting with ayahuasca. I think that there's a whole heck of a lot more that medical research, wellness, all of that has to learn versus, if we start talking about MDMA or LSD or ketamine, I think the analysis changes a bit. These medicines that don't have such substantial lineage and connection, and they, all non-ordinary states, no matter whether it's plant-based, psychedelic, meditation, like can all produce profound spiritual experience, right? But I think, it's interesting. I definitely agree with Connor on the medical contraindications. And I think that there's also some nuance with the more new age, for new age religion type stuff where ethics, right? The therapeutic containers therapists have really stringent codes of ethics. And, we all know they don't always adhere to them, but there's repercussions for failure to adhere to that, right? And that's one of the things I worry about in the underground space. There's various communities that absolutely have that kind of internal ethics system and pulse on the community, but it's not universal. And so much is still rests in shadow. And so I think about what about, having in, the spiritual containers is having some form of ethics consultations, right? It doesn't need to be to an outside body per se, but an internal council of, with elders present, with women present, with individuals of intergeneration and experience present who can bring different amounts of wisdom. So I think that there's lots, and the ability to hold, the training and non-judgment and just holding the container, things like that. I think that can be really helpful in the spiritual space. Some individuals come from areas where they learn to be incredibly directive, which could be true to their nature, but I think that it segues a bit more. It starts segueing a bit more into cult energy and things like that. And I think that high standards of ethics are just so important that need to be brought in.
Say that's huge too. And I mean, just from like my perspective, a lot of my facilitation is done through a more Shipibo lens of helping people after, psychedelic experiences to facilitate and discuss. But then we also have a lot of training from therapists as well in, facilitation afterwards, because we kind of bridge the Western model with the Indigenous model. I kind of do a little bit of both. I can do either one specifically if people want. It really depends on the person. But finding that bridge and that mix, so you do maintain that like extreme ethical side of facilitation, and caring for people is super important. So yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like the medical and therapeutic sides can kind of provide like a practical scaffolding that makes the application of these medicines, especially in a context outside of their original context, like makes the application more feasible. Cool. Thank you all so much for this has been really informative and engaging, and thanks so much for indulging all of our questions. Did anybody else have any questions, or was there anything you guys had on your minds that hadn't been mentioned yet? Or
Well, I was just gonna ask, just kind of a more open-ended question to kind of wrap it up with. Was there anything that really, I guess, like surprised you about this whole experience? Because I remember at one point in time, you guys dropped the word "wild" to describe some of the process. So, I would say that would be maybe kind of an open question for you, or maybe anything else that you guys want to make a comment on before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think for me, what was really interesting was getting to the final end stages and realizing the memorandum of agreement was with nearly identical to others, and just, recognizing that there's specific things that need to go into each because it is case by case, right? But just really looking at that and seeing how much of it was merely copied and pasted. And just thinking about how long we took for 3 years to have nearly an identical provision, I thought was wild, right? And just, indicative of a number of things, but also just how deeply inefficient the process was, and I think had Connor just not been so determined, Connor was determined, we're going to keep going. And that was huge. I think that they tried to exhaust, and they came close.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, timeline was insane to me how long it took, but I mean, I didn't expect too much less. But when you think you're close and they say like we're close, and then it's another year, and then you're like, okay, this is it. Or they would give a timeline like, okay, this month you're going to be approved, and then that month passes, and 6 months later you get an email. That was wild and heartbreaking and challenging. And I don't know, it was interesting. And I talked to I don't know how many lawyers and studied I don't know how many different things to get this process through. And I'd say one of the most wild things is we actually got through it. And I'm not in prison, so that was a shocker, right? Because
And I never would have let you go to prison.
I totally fair. I know you wouldn't have, but there was definitely a little bit of curiosity at the beginning that people are like, "Oh, everything you're doing is just setting yourself up for conspiracy," and I'm like, "Oh, good, good. Let's see what happens." So
Yeah.
that was a little wild once we got approved, and it didn't end up like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think also, like, what just came to mind is the approach that Pat really engineered of working with like holding strong on what we need to hold strong on, and also, moving forth with developing a working relationship. So many of these prior cases were just so adversarial, and ego gets involved, and it's just doing this the whole time. Whereas Pat really engineered a process and carried the vision through, to, what I felt was moving in alignment with the spirit of the medicine.
Absolutely. Yeah, the collaborative approach was the best approach possible for sure. And I don't think it could be done another way, honestly. If you're going into it in a combative manner, then it's just not going to happen. Because I mean, they drug us out and we were going through like a collaborative event. If we were banging heads with them, it could have taken 12 years.
Mm-hmm. And it has taken some people substantial amounts of time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, congrats on getting through the process and coming out on the other side. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who are grateful for the knowledge you kind of accumulated in the process of being basically the guinea pigs of this this new kind of legal framework. So yeah, thank you all so much. And we're happy to share any kind of links or anything like that with our networks if there's ways that people can help or anything like that. So feel free to send those over. And yeah, thank you again. This has been really fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great.
thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Cool.